Sarah had always prided herself on being observant. As a freelance graphic designer, attention to detail was her bread and butter. She noticed when clients changed their minds about color schemes, when her neighbor Mrs. Henderson forgot to water her roses, and when her favorite coffee shop switched to a cheaper brand of beans. But somehow, she had missed the most obvious signs right under her own roof. It started with small things that seemed perfectly innocent at the time. Her husband Jake began working late more frequently, claiming his construction company had landed several big contracts. Her sister Emma, who lived just 20 minutes away, started dropping by more often when Jake wasn't home. Or so Sarah thought. Emma would always ask casual questions about Jake's schedule, disguising her interest as sisterly concern about Sarah working too hard while he was away. "You should take more time for yourself," Emma would say, curled up on Sarah's couch with a cup of tea. "Maybe join that yoga class downtown. I heard they have evening sessions." Sarah appreciated her sister's concern, but she was content with her routine. At 32, she had built a comfortable life with Jake in their modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street. They'd been married for 6 years, together for 9, and while they'd talked about having children, they'd decided to wait until Jake's business was more stable. The first real crack in her oblivious contentment came on a Tuesday evening in March. Sarah had been fighting a particularly stubborn migraine all day and decided to leave her home office early. As she walked to the kitchen for some pain medication, she heard Jake's phone buzzing on the counter. The screen lit up with a text notification, and even through her headache-induced haze, she caught a glimpse of the sender's name, Emma. The message preview showed just enough to make her pause. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow when she's..." The phone screen went dark before she could read the rest. Sarah stood there for a moment, holding the bottle of ibuprofen, trying to piece together why her sister would be texting her husband about seeing him when she, presumably Sarah herself, was somewhere else. But the throbbing in her head made it difficult to think clearly, and she dismissed it as probably something about a surprise they were planning for her birthday, which was still 2 months away. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began noticing other small oddities. Jake's cologne seemed stronger some evenings when he came home from work, as if he'd reapplied it. Emma started canceling their regular Saturday shopping trips, claiming she was busy with her real estate clients. When they did spend time together, Emma seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently and smiling at messages she wouldn't share. The second major red flag came during Easter dinner at their parents' house. Sarah was helping her mother in the kitchen when she overheard Jake and Emma laughing together on the back porch. Their laughter had an intimate quality that made Sarah pause, dish towel in hand. Through the window, she watched them standing closer than she remembered siblings-in-law typically standing, Emma's hand briefly touching Jake's arm, as she whispered something that made him grin. "They get along so well," her mother commented, following Sarah's gaze. "It's wonderful when families blend together like that." Sarah nodded absently, but something cold had settled in her stomach. She tried to shake off the feeling, reminding herself that she'd always wanted Jake and Emma to have a good relationship. After all, Emma was her only sibling, and Jake was her husband. It made sense that they'd become close over the years, but as spring turned to summer, the signs became harder to ignore. Jake's work clothes sometimes smelled like Emma's perfume, a distinctive vanilla and jasmine scent Sarah had helped her pick out years ago. Emma started wearing new jewelry and clothes that seemed expensive for someone who'd been complaining about slow sales in the housing market. Most telling of all, both of them had developed an almost supernatural ability to know each other's whereabouts. "Oh, Jake mentioned he'd be working on the Henderson project today," Emma would say when Sarah suggested they grab lunch near his job site. "Emma said she had showings all afternoon," Jake would explain when Sarah wondered why her sister hadn't returned her calls. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, scattered across months of ordinary days and unremarkable conversations. Sarah just hadn't been looking for a puzzle at all. She'd been living her life, trusting the two people she loved most, completely unaware that they had been living entirely different lives behind her back. It wasn't until a sweltering July afternoon, when Sarah decided to surprise Jake with lunch at his current job site, that the foundation of her carefully constructed world began to crumble in earnest. Sarah pulled into the construction site parking lot with a bag of Jake's favorite sandwiches from the deli on 5th Street. The July heat was oppressive, and she could see the workers moving slowly in the blazing sun. She grabbed her phone to call Jake and let him know she was there, but realized she'd left it charging at home. No matter, she'd just find him among the crew. The foreman, a weathered man named Bill whom she'd met at a few company barbecues, spotted her first. His expression shifted from friendly recognition to something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Sarah. Hey there. Jake's he's not on site today, actually." She frowned, adjusting her grip on the lunch bag. Not on site. But he left for work this morning like always. Said he'd be here until at least 4. Bill scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable. "Yeah, well, he called in around 10. Said he had some personal business to take care of. Family emergency or something." Family emergency. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but not because she was worried. Her parents were healthy. Jake's parents lived in Florida and would have called her directly if something was wrong. The only family emergency that would require Jake's immediate attention without Sarah knowing about it would involve… "Did he say anything else?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. "Not really. Just that he'd be back tomorrow." Bill's eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. "Everything okay at home?" Sarah managed a smile and some excuse about wires getting crossed, then walked back to her car on unsteady legs. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, air conditioning blasting, trying to think rationally. There could be a dozen explanations. Maybe Jake had decided to surprise her by taking the afternoon off. Maybe he was running errands. Maybe he was planning something special and had asked Emma to help, which would explain the secretive texts and conversations. But as she drove home, Sarah found herself taking a detour that led past Emma's apartment complex. She told herself she was just being silly, that she'd drive by and see Emma's car in its usual spot and laugh at her own paranoia later. Emma's silver Honda wasn't in its designated parking space. Sarah's hands began to shake as she pulled into a visitor's spot. She walked up to Emma's second-floor apartment and knocked, though she already knew no one would answer. For good measure, she tried calling Emma's phone from the building's lobby. It went straight to voicemail, something about being with clients and calling back soon. The drive home felt endless. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, trying to construct innocent explanations for what she was discovering. Maybe Emma was showing a house across town. Maybe Jake was helping a friend move. Maybe they were planning a surprise party for someone and had roped Bill into covering for them. But deep down, in a place she'd been trying to ignore for months, Sarah already knew. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange state of suspended animation, pretending to work while actually staring at her computer screen, waiting for Jake to come home. When she heard his truck in the driveway at 5:30, she forced herself to act normal. "How was work?" she called from the kitchen, where she was pretending to prep dinner. "Hot as hell," Jake replied, and Sarah could hear him kicking off his boots by the door. "Bill had us working on that new foundation all day. I'm beat." The lie was so casual, so effortless, that Sarah felt something inside her chest crack. She turned to look at him as he entered the kitchen, searching his face for any sign of guilt or discomfort. But Jake looked exactly as he always did after a day at work. Tired, slightly sunburned, completely normal. "You look like you could use a shower," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Yeah, definitely. What's for dinner?" They fell into their usual evening routine, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Sarah found herself studying Jake's every movement, listening to his words with new ears. When he mentioned being tired, she wondered where he'd really spent his energy. When he said he loved her before they went to sleep, she wondered if the words meant anything at all anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Sarah continued her work, met deadlines, had phone calls with clients, all while feeling like she was watching her life through glass. She started paying closer attention to Jake's schedule, noting discrepancies between what he told her and what she could verify. She began checking Emma's social media more frequently, looking for clues in her sister's carefully curated posts. The final confirmation came the following Tuesday. Sarah had told Jake she'd be working late on a project for a demanding client. A lie, but she needed to test her growing suspicions. She waited until Jake left for work, then drove to a coffee shop with a clear view of Emma's apartment complex. At 11:47 a.m., Jake's familiar blue pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Sarah watched her husband walk up the stairs to her sister's apartment. She watched Emma open the door, not in work clothes, but in a sundress Sarah had never seen before. She watched Emma's face light up when she saw Jake, watched her stand on tiptoe to kiss him, not the casual peck of in-laws, but the deep, hungry kiss of lovers. Sarah sat in her car for 20 minutes after they disappeared inside, staring at the closed apartment door, feeling like the world had tilted off its axis. 6 years of marriage, 9 years together, a lifetime of trust, all of it built on lies she'd been too naive or too trusting to see. Sarah drove home in a daze, muscle memory guiding her through familiar streets, while her mind struggled to process what she'd witnessed. She parked in her driveway and sat there for several minutes, staring at the house she'd shared with Jake for 4 years. The yellow paint they'd chosen together suddenly looked garish in the afternoon sunlight. The garden she'd lovingly tended seemed like a mockery of the life she thought she'd been building. Inside, the silence felt different, heavier, more oppressive. Sarah walked through the rooms, seeing everything with new eyes. The wedding photos on the mantel now felt like evidence of an elaborate deception. The couch where Emma had sat dozens of times, offering sisterly advice and support, became a stage where her betrayal had been performed with Oscar-worthy conviction. Sarah knew she had to confront them, but she needed time to think, to plan. She wasn't ready to face Jake when he came home that evening, so she called her friend Rachel and asked if she could stay the night. Rachel, hearing something broken in Sarah's voice, asked no questions and simply said yes. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work and spent hours walking through the nearby park, trying to decide how to handle the situation. She considered dramatic confrontations, legal consultations, and burning everything to the ground. But eventually, she settled on something simpler: the truth, delivered calmly and directly. She waited until Jake came home from work. His real work this time, she assumed. He found her sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a folder of printed bank statements. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Jake's face immediately shifted into concern. "What's wrong? You look upset." "I know about Emma." The words came out steady and clear, surprising Sarah with their strength. The color drained from Jake's face so quickly that Sarah almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. "Sarah, I don't know what you think you know, but I saw you yesterday, at her apartment. I watched you kiss her." Sarah slid the bank statements across the table. "I also did some checking. The Henderson project you've been working on? It finished 3 weeks ago. The evening meetings you've been having? Your company doesn't have evening meetings." Jake stared at the papers without really seeing them. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for months. I've known for certain since yesterday." Sarah's voice remained remarkably calm, though inside she felt like she was falling apart. "How long has it been going on?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Jake whispered, 2 years. 2 years. Sarah let that sink in. 2 Christmases, 2 anniversaries, countless family dinners and gatherings where they'd all sat around the same table, pretending to be a loving family, while Jake and Emma carried on their secret relationship right under everyone's noses. "Do you love her?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own curiosity about the answer. Jake's face crumpled. "I love you both. I never meant for this to happen. It got complicated." Complicated. Sarah repeated the word like it was foreign. "That's an interesting way to describe a 2-year affair with my sister." Over the next hour, the whole sordid story came out in painful pieces. It had started innocently enough. Emma had been going through a rough breakup and had been spending more time with both of them. Jake had offered to help her with some repairs around her apartment. One thing led to another, as Jake put it, as if they'd accidentally fallen into bed together. But what hurt Sarah most wasn't the physical betrayal. It was the emotional intimacy they'd shared. Jake described inside jokes he'd developed with Emma, conversations about their future together, plans they'd made while Sarah worked in the next room, oblivious to it all. "We talked about telling you," Jake said, tears streaming down his face. "We just never found the right time." "The right time," Sarah echoed. "In 2 years, you never found the right time to tell me you were in love with my sister." 3 days later, Sarah sat across from Emma in a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory, somewhere they wouldn't make a scene. Emma looked smaller somehow, diminished, her usual confidence replaced by something that might have been shame. "I'm sorry," Emma said before Sarah could speak. "I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did it anyway. For 2 years. Emma nodded miserably. "I tried to end it so many times. We both did. But we kept finding our way back to each other." "How romantic," Sarah said dryly. "Did you ever think about what this would do to our family? To Mom and Dad? Every day." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "But I was selfish. I was in love, and I convinced myself that somehow it would all work out." Sarah studied her sister's face, looking for the woman she'd grown up with, shared secrets with, trusted with her life. That person was still there, but she was someone else too. Someone capable of an enormous betrayal disguised as love. 6 months later, Sarah signed the divorce papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. Jake had moved in with Emma after Sarah asked him to leave, making their relationship official in the most anticlimactic way possible. Sarah's parents had been devastated by the news, struggling to understand how their family had imploded so completely. Sarah found a new apartment across town, closer to her favorite hiking trails, and farther from the memories that haunted every corner of her old neighborhood. She threw herself into her work, taking on bigger projects and building the design business she'd always dreamed of, but never had the confidence to pursue fully. Some evenings, usually when the loneliness felt particularly sharp, Sarah would think about the signs she'd missed and wonder if she could have prevented it all by paying closer attention. But mostly, she tried to focus on moving forward. She learned to cook for one, to sleep in the center of the bed, to make decisions without consulting anyone else. Jake and Emma sent a wedding invitation 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Sarah threw it away without opening it, but she heard from mutual friends that it was a small ceremony, just immediate family and a few close friends. The same people who had attended Sarah and Jake's wedding were there to celebrate their new beginning. Sarah never spoke to Emma again, though she heard updates through their parents. Emma had quit real estate and was working at Jake's construction company. They'd bought a house on the other side of town. They seemed happy, according to their mother, though she always said it with a note of sadness in her voice. 2 years after her divorce, Sarah met David at an art gallery opening. He was kind and funny, and completely transparent about everything: his past relationships, his daily schedule, his thoughts and feelings. When he told Sarah he loved her, 6 months into their relationship, she believed him completely. Not because she was naive anymore, but because she'd learned to recognize the difference between truth and performance. On their wedding day, Sarah's parents walked her down the aisle, beaming with joy and relief. The guest list was smaller than her first wedding. Some relationships hadn't survived the scandal, but it was filled with people who truly supported her happiness. As she exchanged vows with David, Sarah realized that betrayal, devastating as it had been, had taught her something valuable about trust. It wasn't something to be given blindly, but something to be earned and treasured when found. Sarah never thanked Jake and Emma for the lesson, but in quiet moments, she acknowledged that their betrayal had ultimately led her to a more authentic life. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to value herself, and to recognize real love when it finally appeared. The price had been steep, but the woman who emerged from the wreckage was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more aware of her own worth.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.